So I think we're ready to begin. I just said to Liam, I feel like the college professor and everybody is sitting down the back. But thank you, Mayor, Mike, and Chris. So you're the good pupils that, of course, sit up front. And I said Liam's the teacher's pet, so he sits right next to me. Okay, so without further ado, this for me is really a very different process than how I have presented budgets in the past. So I thank all of you because I know your days are busy, your times are busy, for coming this morning and hearing the kickoff to, I laugh when I say that because the budget season, I believe, really did begin July 1st, 2022. So, we are here to present the budget for what we call FY24, and again, thank you so much for being here this morning. I would like to thank the entire school community for welcoming me to the Newton Public Schools for the 22-23 school year. Since July 1st, I have had the privilege of serving as your Interim Superintendent of Schools, a role in which I have been proud to support the full breadth and depth of high-quality educational programming. With high expectations for student learning and meaningful opportunities for all students to reach their full potential, the Newton Public Schools is undoubtedly one of the premier school districts in the Commonwealth. Working with NPS leaders, educators, and staff, and meeting with families over the past several months has clarified my understanding of Newton's unwavering commitment to academic excellence and educational equity. This commitment, which begins in preschool and continues through our post-secondary programs, means students are challenged academically, provided with appropriate mental health and social and emotional support, and prepared to engage in the most complex issues facing our society. Some of the most important initiatives have been realized in the past few years, and they include a high-quality, engaging full-day kindergarten program, optimal class sizes to provide positive learning environments focused on personalized learning for all students, additional instructional and support staff and services to improve academic achievement and support all learners, meaningful social and emotional supports, and increased guidance and counseling to support the growing needs of our students, implementation of social justice initiatives to create a more just and equitable school community, expanded technology program in grades K to 12, hiring and retaining high-qualified, experienced, and committed teachers and staff, and a capital improvement plan that includes a completion of 3 new elementary schools, a newly renovated preschool, and approval for 3 additional new elementary schools in the near future in Lincoln Elliott, Countryside, and Franklin, and certainly we will be addressing Horace Mann. We now find ourselves in the next inflection point for our schools and our community. Our students and the world around us has changed dramatically. Our continued recovery from the pandemic means supporting the heightened academic and social and emotional needs of students, as well as supporting our educators and staff who are experiencing their own trauma and exhaustion. To maintain a strong, high-quality school system that benefits not only our students, but our entire community, we must do the following. We must provide an academically rigorous and engaging program of study in which students have access to challenging courses and classes. Create inclusive school communities that meet the needs of all learners and ensure that all students feel welcomed and supported. Maintain our commitment to providing robust and meaningful mental health supports for all students in our schools. Continue our commitment to building an anti-racist community in which students and staff recognize structural systems that have led to systemic racism, dismantle these systems, and build a more just and equitable future for all our students. Maintain the ability to attract and retain highly qualified, talented, and experienced educators and leaders who are committed to serving the Newton school community. Continue important progress on updating our school buildings so that they promote and sustain 21st century learning. All of our current initiatives and our commitments for the future must be supported by our budget, a budget that has been strained over the past few years by COVID, by rising operational costs, declining revenues, and long-standing structural deficits. Last year, we reduced teaching positions and support staff to balance the FY23 budget. While these cuts were painful, we were able to maintain essential academic and social and emotional supports for students. However, we knew that going into this year that the budget would be tight, and the budget gap would likely be larger than it was the previous year. In October, Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller, recognizing the challenges faced by both city and schools in FY23, proposed an operational override for Newton voters to consider. The override would have provided the Newton Public Schools operating budget with an additional $4.5 million this year. It was my greatest privilege to meet so many Newton Public School families and Newton community members as I attended PTO meetings, community forums, virtual town hall events to share information about why this additional funding was needed. I learned so much about both the successes of this district and the very real challenges that persist. Families and community members asked important and challenging questions about district staffing and operations. It was an important exercise in clearly communicating our commitment to meeting the needs of all our students both now and into the future. Ultimately, the voters made a different choice and did not approve the operational override. We respect the will of the voters and will work within the parameters that have been laid before us. Our strategy is to do everything possible to limit the impact on students in our classrooms while fulfilling our obligations to prepare a balanced budget. While our FY24 budget goal is to maintain the current level of service provided to students and build a sustainable budget over time, we face an $8 million shortfall in our current proposed budget for the next school year. This shortfall comes despite the 3.73% increase in allocation from the city. Lack of funding from the failed override, rising costs, changes in funding from the state, expiration of grant funding, use of one-time funds, and the rise in student needs all contribute to the significant budget gap. Given the size of the budget gap, it simply will not be possible to maintain the same level of service the Newton Public Schools has provided to students in past years. Our budget assumes a $2 million carry forward from the FY23 budget into FY24, as well as an increase in our allocation from the city by an additional $600,000 and a $1.4 million one-time funding, which is, I'm calling it a circuit breaker bridge credit of $1.4 million from the city, resulting in an FY24 deficit of $4.9 million. The carry forward is possible due to spending and hiring freeze instituted in January 2023, as well as an inability to hire for some needed positions throughout the year, and this is due to staffing shortages. However, this continued reliance on carry forward each year creates a structural budget deficit that is unsustainable over time. Closing a $4.9 million budget gap will impact every corner of the Newton Public School organization. The 4 areas in which we look to make reductions include non-personnel expenses, administrative and operations, that's personnel and expenses, extracurricular activities, athletics, fine arts, clubs, and unfortunately, classroom and school personnel. Specific reductions and impacts will include reduced classroom teachers and aides, resulting in increased class sizes at all levels and some reduced support in classrooms. Reduce supplemental and enrichment programming and coordination, as well as instrumental offerings at the elementary level. Reduce after-school athletics and enrichment programs at the middle and high school levels. Reduce administrative and operations positions throughout the district. Reduce English language learner staffing and support. Reduce instructional software, segments of one-to-one device program, library and instructional technology, and reduce professional development, staffing and administration in student services and social and emotional learning departments, and increase fees. I want to stop there for a second, and I want people to focus on the word reduce. When you heard me talk about across-the-board cuts, we were looking to make the impact not as great in any one area. So when you hear me talk about, for instance, extracurricular, athletics, fine arts, it is a reduction. It is certainly not an elimination. Let me make that clear. While these reductions are painful, we continue to be committed to expanding our special education programs to allow our Newton students to remain in our district schools learning and growing with their friends and peers. Expanding current programs allows the district to support our students with appropriate and specialized learning programs and avoid outside placements with costly out-of-district tuitions. Two additional areas in which we will seek to restore or enhance funding are in teaching and learning and cybersecurity. Last year, we reduced curriculum coordination and academic support staff. Curriculum staff provide critical support to vetting new curriculum, such as your reading curriculum, monitoring implementation across schools, providing support and training, and ensuring collaboration across the district in the areas of teaching and learning. In addition, we see cyber attacks on districts across the country. It is critical that our technology infrastructure and cybersecurity are able to protect student data and prevent disruptions of our system's operations. It is important to know for our students the impact of the pandemic is not over. If I had a nickel for every time I have said that, not only this year but in previous years, we are still dealing with the impacts of the pandemic on this generation. It frankly will impact student academics and mental health for years to come. Investing in our schools as a primary resource and post-pandemic recovery is a key strategy for investing in the well-being of our students and the strength of our entire community. As my time in Newton draws to a close, I would like to thank our partners, Police Chief Carmichael, Fire Chief Gentile, Commissioner of Public Buildings Josh Morse, Commissioner of Public Works Jim McGonigal, Commissioner of Health and Human Services Linda Walsh, and President of the Newton Teachers Association Mike Zillis, who is here with me today. I have valued their partnership and collaboration this year as we have worked together to serve the students and families of this city. I would also like to thank the Newton City Council for their support in putting 2 debt exclusions and the operating override before the voters. The approval of funding for both Countryside and Franklin means we can continue our progress in modernizing our school buildings. Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller and her team at City Hall, including City Chief Operation Officer Jonathan Yo, City Chief Financial Officer Maureen Lemieux, and Director of Community Engagement and Inclusion Hattie Kerwin-Derrick, were true partners this year, as together we shared information about the schools and the city budgets and the financial outlook. As we attended meetings, forums, discussions, and town halls, it was very clear to me, Mayor, that your team cares deeply about serving and caring for the residents of Newton, and I thank you. It has been my pleasure to work with the Newton School Committee this year. Tamika, Kathy, Rajiv, Chris, Emily, Paul, Cove, and Mayor Fuller. They are a group of dedicated individuals committed to supporting the goals of our district. I admire their advocacy on behalf of students, as well as the time and effort they dedicate to their role in the community. This year, they worked tirelessly to select a new superintendent for the district. Dr. Nolan will be a terrific leader for Newton, and I know the school committee is ready to support her. Our district leaders, both central staff and principals, thank you for taking time to be here today. You continue to provide outstanding leadership during this year of transition. To all the principals, I would like to personally commend you for your dedication. During the past few years, you have been determined, compassionate, and knowledgeable and supportive for all our students and families when it has mattered most. You are the backbone of this district. At the core of the Newton Public Schools is a dynamic and forward-thinking central staff team that has and will continue to be strategic, deliberate, and collaborative in their efforts to provide a premier education for every student across our district. Thank you, Aisha, Renee, Casey, Toby, Steve, Kathy, and Jill. I am grateful for their support as they help me to guide the district. Dr. Nolan is fortunate to have a terrific team to welcome her to Newton next year. I am especially grateful for my partnership with Liam. with Sean, with Alyssa, and the entire team in financial services for preparing for this challenging budget throughout this school year. And I am most grateful to have worked alongside my executive assistant, Carolyn Campo, and the school committee executive assistant and mine, Lisa Mazzola, during this past school year. They have been invaluable while working long hours to support an interim superintendent, the school committee, and our entire, Newton Public School community. I also commend our communications director, Julie McDonough, for always working behind the scenes to highlight and set the tone for messaging and portraying the Newton Public School values to all stakeholders. And finally, to the Newton Public School educators and staff, they're incredibly hardworking, resilient, and persistent. Despite the challenges of the past few years, they remain committed to teaching and supporting each and every one of our students. The heightened need of students, coupled with their own traumatic experience with the pandemic, make their jobs very, very difficult. Yet, I see them every day in our classrooms, giving of themselves completely to help our students. Despite the financial challenges ahead, I remain committed to doing everything possible to support our educators and this generation of Newton Public School students. And let me stop there, and I will prepare for the presentation of the budget. Okay, so for this budget, the agenda today is looking at our FY goal, our review of budget drivers, budget unknowns, advocating for additional state funding, the impact of debt exclusions and the operational override, services to maintain, reductions proposed, and fee increases proposed. This slide here, we have been putting the slide out there, I really think, since our budget presentation on January 23rd, when we talked about our goal of maintaining the current level of services provided to students and build a sustainable budget over time. However, with the failed override, we are unable to maintain the current level of services. And I always talk about when we opened those doors in September for our students to enter our classrooms, will look a little bit different next year. So we are, though, looking to build a sustainable budget over time, and we will work very hard to do that. One thing my central staff team tells me all the time, as we spend hours and hours working with the principals, our department heads, coming up with the budget that you're going to see, is we do not want to be going through this year after year after year. Next slide, please. We've also talked about this for quite a while. When you talk about growing student needs, what are the drivers there? So we talk about, again, social and emotional support. We talk about gaps in learning that our students have experienced over the past 3 challenging years. Those are the things, those very things are what make the people that support our students so important. And when we hear about the challenges families face, even getting some social and emotional support for their children beyond the school day, we know how impactful it is, those hours that we have the students and beyond, to do everything we can to make sure our students come to school prepared, ready to learn, and do everything we can to make their time in the Newton Public Schools a success. Next is the rising costs and expenses. And we talk about costs such as transportation costs with our special education, utilities, and again, when I'm talking to all of you and to people watching, we're all looking at this in our own homes. You can imagine what it is like in a school district. The percentages are very high. Inflation, health insurance, all these factors to continue to go up. When you hear us talk about, and we are pleased right now with a 3.73% increase this year, but when you look at these rising costs, it is outgrowing that increase, hence some of the decisions that we have to make. The use of one-time funds, and it's interesting, all of us can think back right now. Today is the 29th of March. You put yourself back, is it 3 years ago? I'm losing track. So 3 years ago at this time, every community, we shut down. We didn't know what our funding would be. We couldn't count on the things we could count on to prepare a budget at that time that was a few months away. And during that time, we were very fortunate, Mayor, you talk about this all the time, of having that infusion, whether it was the schools with ESSER, ARPA, CARES Act, I could go on and on. There was so much support that we had to pivot. We had to pivot in how we were teaching students. We had to pivot in how we prepared our buildings. We had to pivot in how we fed kids, families, technology. All of the things that we did cost money, and money we had. So the use of one-time funds, and you will hear me talk about it today, are coming to an end. That's a good thing in some ways. A good thing meaning the pandemic, again, I'm telling you we're not out of the pandemic, but we're moving beyond that. When I look at this school year, even last night, we had a community event that had, I don't even know how many people, certainly well over hundreds of people in the cafeteria at Newton North High School during a public forum. We come together for good things in our schools. We see parents filling the buildings. You know, we have performances, we have sports. All of those things make us feel very good about what's happening in the future. But at the same time, with some of the funds that have allowed us to come out of this pandemic, they are not going to be there as we go forward, and we have to pull ourselves off of, and we're no different than other districts, of coming off of using one-time funding, and you'll hear me talk about that this year. And this arrow had to be different, and I know you heard me in my opening speech talk about the will of the voters, and clearly that is why we're here today to talk about this very challenging budget. But I cannot tell you that I am not disappointed in the Operation Override failing. I think, again, it would have done so much, and I want you to think about that as we go through this budget and understand that it's interesting when I look back last October, Mayor, with the amount of money, and I know it wouldn't completely have erased the deficit, but when you hear me talk about the deficit going forward, it would have gone a long way for allowing us to move on in a very different way. Next slide, please. This, I think, was one of the most impactful statements. I reached out to the principals when we were doing our budget, I believe, in January, because I had heard teachers in classrooms when I was out in the schools, when I had the opportunity. And they would talk to me about, again, excited to be back. But they knew what their role was in front of, whether it was 18 kids in a classroom, whether it was a little more. I walked into a classroom at one point with 27 students at the Ward School, which, thank goodness, we were able to take care of in January of this year. But I knew what those teachers were facing, and the veteran teachers would tell me it was the most difficult time in their entire career. So look at this statement. And it says, and I am going to read it, I don't think it has ever been harder to be a teacher than at this moment in time. Students are coming to school every day with complex mental health and learning needs that require incredible support, thinking, and collaboration. The need is above what I have seen, and again, this is a quote by a leader, a Newton Public School leader, in 20 plus years in education. Teachers desperately want to meet the needs of all their students, but it is really hard and taking a toll. Our psychologist and SEL team are inundated with emails from parents looking for help. This is another slide that many of you have seen, and unfortunately, it hasn't changed. When you look at, again, some of our budget drivers and things impacting this budget, because as I said, we have almost $10 million of additional funding from the city. So it's not that we did not receive additional funding, but I want you to look at some of those costs. So the statewide out-of-district tuition increase, and again, I want to be really clear about this. When we talk about supporting our private schools for some of our special education students with very complex needs, it is exactly what we need to do. We need to make sure that those schools are there, that when our students have a need, we have a place that they can go and have the education that they justly deserve and need. But to go to a 14% increase, we were notified in September, when usually it's between 1% and 3%. The impact has been about $1.4 million of additional funding that we did not expect to be planning during what we knew was already going to be a challenging budget. You will hear me talk about state advocacy. You will hear me talk about a breakfast that you heard me talk about on March 3rd that I feel was very successful. We are watching very cautiously the state budget process, and I thank the mayor because you will hear me right now talk about that so-called bridge credit to get us by while we wait for a state budget that probably won't be passed, I'm going to say, till July sometime. Health insurance continues to go up, 5%. Already you can see the percentages. I'm not great at math, but right away you can see that this is going to be impactful on our budget. Our van transportation, we were fortunate, and Liam, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we had a contract with our buses, with Eastern buses. This was clearly about an impact of 20% increase in our van transportation. So again, you look at $900,000, and again, our gas and utilities, 25%. So a real impact on the budget. Next slide. I already talked about the use of one-time funds, and I called out the CARES Act, the ARPA funding, which are city funds, our ESSER 1, 2, and 3, which really is coming to a close we'll finish up using ESSER 3 in FY24, which funds some of our positions, some of our initiatives. It will be expiring. It's also something we will have to take into account in planning the FY25 budget. Our carry-forward reliance on FY23 was $4.6 million. Some of that money that we had in our school budget, some of this was one-time funding from the city to actually get you through what was a very difficult budget season last year. And this year, and this is not a way to have a budget. You don't in January, and unfortunately it hasn't just been in Newton for me. I have done this previously where come January, you say to your principals, you say to your department heads, we need to freeze spending. We need to be very, very careful before we approve things that you should have at your disposal as you plan for the school year. So when we do that, we look at hiring. And again, there are certain places we have to hire. You know, a teacher leaves or retires, you know, at a certain point in the year, we need a classroom teacher to fill that role. But there were other positions we were unable to hire, not because there weren't great efforts to do that. So when you see a $2 million carry forward, I would love to tell you in a great year when we have all kinds of money, you know, we were being good stewards of the tax dollars, but that is not the case right now. It was taking time in January to freeze budget, freeze hiring, and really make some very difficult decisions. And I want to call out before I leave this slide, and again, I hope I have these correct, but in FY21, when you talk about all of these funds that the school used, you're talking $16 million. So you are talking between CARES, ARPA, ESSER, all of that funding. FY22, $12.5 million. FY23, I believe we had $4.8 million. And going into FY24, I believe it's $500,000. The one thing I will tell you, I see you going like this, Liam, it might be a little bit more than 500,000. Yes, yeah, but I'm, again, talking about kind of the grant funding. The other thing I will remind everybody that in the ARPA funding, the mayor has committed to $2 million, which we do have a few years to be able to spend to put towards our new reading curriculum that we are presently in pilots and in a research program to see what is the best fit, you know, for our district. Next slide, please. So the failed operational override. The $4.5 million additional funding is not available. I know this is etched in every one of our minds at this point in our operating budget. It is in mine. The $775,000 additional funding, not available for Horace Mann for an addition or renovation, but I know the mayor has been actively working on a plan for the future project of Horace Mann, and Mayor, I know that's good news that you have started to share with the community. What are the budget unknowns? We are presently in contract, in negotiations with our unions, with our Newton Teachers Association, with our Newton Educational Secretaries Association, NESA, and with our Newton Public Schools Custodian Association. In this, again, we are doing in good faith. We started the process months ago. We continue to meet at the bargaining table, all the while coming together, and again, with Mike and Chris here, and so many of your members. I want to thank you for the support. You know, during the override campaign, you were true partners in that and understood the impact of what that would mean, you know, for our district. Our state aid is an unknown. Chapter 70, a supplemental budget that is presently before our state legislature. circuit breaker funding, and universal free lunch status. Another budget unknown is our health insurance costs, and I know, Mayor, your team, our team, has been coming together, our union, talking about a way forward with health insurance to make sure that that makes sense going forward and something that we can afford. And our enrollment-based needs. So we continue to watch. As you have a tight budget, you still have to plan for unknowns. Students moving into the district, during the summer, making sure that we are able to provide classroom space, optimal opportunities for learning, and meeting the needs of all of those students. So this slide, I am so excited to deliver in this presentation. So it has been interesting to sit and to look at Countryside and the Franklin elementary schools, to look at the renditions, the projects moving forward. I know we put it on pause until we could get through the override, but passed they did. Thank you to the community for understanding the importance. And again, I have been in communities where it has been difficult to make these priorities. And this has been something that you have been doing for, I think, over the past 10 years, and probably will continue to do this into infinity, is my guess. Because a district that pays attention to its schools, making sure that you have 21st century learning, and it was no more on display for me that in Brockton for 42 years, I was in what at one time was a state-of-the-art high school building. 50 years old, I would still hear about the new building. But last night, sitting in Newton North High School and looking at that beautiful, wonderful facility, looking at the outside facilities, looking at what it was for the community to come together. That's a community that cares about its students. So thank you so much for approving this in the budget. So advocating for additional state funding and, or for any additional funding. And we were out there, again, with our PTOs in every one of our schools, talking to our parents. We met with, again, some of our community partners, our Chinese language school. We met on the weekend. Thank you, An Ping, and our group for making sure that we were able to share with all of our community partners. And then most importantly and most impactful, that March 3rd date, when we had legislators, representatives, in the War Memorial at City Hall, where we hosted a breakfast. We had impactful speakers with superintendents that talked about what is happening to all of our budgets. It didn't matter if you're Wellesley, it doesn't matter if you're Weston or Needham or Brookline or the Newton Public Schools. These impacts were very real, and we're all watching with a critical eye on what is happening at the state legislature. One of the things we asked for was mitigating that 14% increase for our special education programs. Lowering circuit breaker threshold, meaning we would have increased funding in circuit breaker if each district had a lower threshold, and an increase in circuit breaker from 75%, and it's amazing to think I'm saying this, because I can remember years being thrilled that it was up to 75%, but we are looking at an increase up to 90%. And also, I can't say that without saying the other piece here is looking at a commission. If you look back on funding of schools with the Foundation Budget Review Commission of 2014, which finished up, I think, in 2019, they're looking to put together a foundation to look at, or a commission to look at special education funding, how we're providing services, and what the escalating costs are. Not that we don't provide these services, but making sure that we are able to legally provide our students with what they need. Next slide, please. This is the most important slide in the deck. And we spent hours on looking at this and trying to make sure that everybody could understand this. So if you go back to our FY23 operating budget allocation, you can see the number up there, over $262 million. Last year, I talked about the one-time funds and the carry forward of almost $4.6 million. That becomes impactful on our budget going forward. So last year, we had available funding of $266+ million to run our district. That is what we have been using this year. Our FY24 operating budget allocation, and I want you to see that, there is a 3.73% increase in funding from the city, a $9.7 million increase. That's a lot of money. I'm sure taxpayers listening to this, I'm sure our families and our community understand that that's supporting your schools. That is saying we care about our schools in a city budget. Unfortunately, with all of the drivers that I talked about, and I'll get to that number, where, again, we had $2 million carry forward, and we've been doing this since January. The circuit breaker bridge credit from the city, which we are so thankful for at this time, allows us available funding of over $275 million in the FY24 budget. What I do need you to see, and this isn't a wish list, but I will tell you, in order to have opened the doors in this September from the previous September, it would have taken $280 million. That would have been a large increase, and I want to make sure that I get the percentage correctly. I believe it would have been a 6.94% increase. Probably unheard of. You can imagine that is a large increase, but this is what is happening across the Commonwealth. Districts are so strapped. The usual increases, the 3.5, maybe up to 4%, is not going to be able to sustain what we need to do in our classroom. There needs to be an infusion of funding, and that's why you hear about advocacy, that's why you hear about partnership, looking every way that we can as to how we find additional money for our budget. So you can simply do the math at this point. The reductions that we have to make going forward are $4.9 million in this budget. Next slide, please. And I think one more percentage I want to mention, and I know I should walk away from this, but I just can't. Had we had the operating override, it would have been a 5.2% increase. It wouldn't have been and we talked about that very honestly everywhere we went. We talked about what the impact would be if we had the override, knowing that was a high increase. We understood that, and we knew it would be a sacrifice. But I want you to see how those numbers line up. So what does the FY24 budget support? It supports a well-rounded academic program with opportunities for support and advancement. And that's important because I want you to hear, again, that although we're going to talk about these deficits, we're doing everything we can to make sure our students have opportunities that the Newton community expects, although you will understand the reductions. Continued support for high-quality instruction and curriculum review, revisions, including universally designed materials so every student can access our curriculum, access our classes, access opportunities. Culturally responsive instruction and inclusive practices and protocols. Counseling and therapeutic support in all our schools. Meaningful inclusive education with programming for students with disabilities. Support to foster student development of social and emotional skills and competencies. And integration of technology into classroom instruction, including funding one-to-one program. So some of you are saying, what do you mean one-to-one program? We've had that around, for a while. The pandemic accelerated that progress. But with the one-time funding, we did not have that in our operating budget. This was our opportunity to get it into our operating budget. So you will hear us talk about, there will be some increases in our IT, in our technology department, and obviously there are some decreases. Reliable and secure network services and operations our budget will support, and tools to support district strategic initiatives, building projects, maintenance, food services, and transportation programs. So this next slide is key additions and restorations for FY24. And the good thing about a budget is once you are working on your budget for next year, you actually get to review what has happened in the previous year. And you will hear us talk about really restoring some positions that were critical and support needed for our students. And before I go further, as I talk about additions and restorations, I want to share that the one thing that our team has talked about is when you make the reductions that we're making, it is critical that we offer support from the superintendent and their team to all our department heads, making sure that you are fully resourced to support those principals throughout the district and the interventionists that will still continue to be able to support higher than not class sizes throughout many of our classrooms in the district. So when you hear about additions and restorations, know that that was at the forefront of many of our discussions. And looking at the first one, expanding the STRIDE program at Bowen. You know, Casey, I don't know how you came here just when I did, is it 9 months ago? And to be able to look at you at the time and say we're going to have to make some decisions, we're going to have to reduce funding, and to work with your team and to be able to come up with methodically, making sure that our students legally were supported, and at the same time we were forward thinking. This would have been easy to say, not the year to bring another program in at Bowen School. But in fact, there are students out there, there is a need, and we were able to put this into our budget going forward. So you will see expanding the STRIDE program at Bowen. Restore curriculum coordination and academic support. Again, this is an area last year. There was a reduction with the coordinators. I think I met with you early on in October and November, and even then, I think it was stressful. It was stressful trying to do the jobs of supporting our teachers, looking at curriculum, you know, making sure that you were that person in those classrooms, professional development. So I am pleased to be able to recommend that we bring those back to their full capacity. Support IT infrastructure, cybersecurity. School committee, you made this very clear early on. We had discussions in executive sessions talking about the nature of security for our systems, and you made it clear that this is something we needed to pay attention to. Interesting enough, we had a call with Commissioner Riley, superintendents, last week, and this was one of his key points in making sure that we're looking at that in districts throughout the Commonwealth. To fund strategic planning and community engagement, software and services. I know Dr. Nolan is counting on this. She's counting on coming into the district, working to do entry planning, transition planning, looking at making decisions based on data which the community is demanding and have a right to hear how we're doing. And if there are challenges that we're facing, how we're facing those challenges. And also looking at, when you hear me talk about, and before I leave, I will talk about profile of a graduate, and it is tiptoeing in, Dr. Nolan, you know, looking at our reports. So this is an important part of this budget going forward to give our new superintendent the opportunity to have much success. To restore per pupil school funding and professional development. I will tell you early on, this concerned me. There was funding cut, whether it was superintendent's office for different initiatives, whether it was professional development for our school leaders. This is something that is critical. When you talk about your staff choosing Newton, when they choose Newton, whether it is a school leader, whether it is a teacher, whether it is a department head, they're choosing it because of the opportunities that you provide. They know that they will be respected professionally and will have those opportunities for collaboration and making decisions about moving the district forward. So we're also restoring charter maintenance, which was picked up last year by one-time funding to continue to pay attention not only to new buildings, but to some of our older buildings. Next slide. So the net budget adjustments by program area, and I also want to let people know as I go forward with this part of the presentation, know that starting on Monday, we have before our school committee in-depth presentations. I believe we start with the instructional areas, secondary schools, elementary schools, our assistant superintendents will be presenting. We'll then go into our student support services, our teaching and learning, and I believe the next week we finish up with operations and our IT. So you will have, this is not in-depth, it is the beginning of the budget process. So our net budget adjustments by program area. In elementary education, and again, these are reductions and additions, a $1.2 million decrease. Secondary education, a $1.5 million decrease. Student services, a 1.1 decrease. And people that have been watching, and you watched some of the presentations, I believe, in February, and I believe lastly on March 1st, I want to say at that time, I think there were gasps by school committee, by people in the audience when you looked at student support services. I want to thank my entire team. By the time we figured out it was going to be a $4.9 million deficit, we were able to make sure that we supported that department to support some of our neediest students, and making sure, even when you talk about mental health and social and emotional learning and supports for our students, we are able to move forward and maintain. Our teaching and learning and our English language learner departments, $259,000. IT and library, and that you see as a plus, $164,000+. Understand you will see some reductions, but also we're bringing some of our IT needs into our operating budget, which is exactly what we're doing coming off of the one-time one funding. Facilities, $45,000. System-wide expenses and benefits, $245,000. And fee increases, which I will talk about later on in this presentation, of $656,000. And the one thing I'll say, because this immediately hits our families when you talk about fee increases, I want to be clear that no student will be turned away from any program or any opportunity based on financial need. And I trust the Newton Public Schools to know how critical that is, how important. Principals, I can see it on your faces. I know how important it is that you are that connection when a family calls, of making sure that families understand that we will support our students in doing this. This is what we called at the time aggressive increase to our fees. And I say that because looking back, and Liam, I'm not sure if it's been 5 years since we have seen fee increases. Total reductions, I hope the math adds up here to the $4.9 million deficit that we're facing. So the total FTE impact, the net for the FY24 budget. So understand, this could be additions, these will be reductions, and I'm going to start with elementary education, a reduction of 25.3 FTEs. Secondary education, 20.7 reduction. Student services, 5.8 reduction. Teaching and learning and our English language learners, 1.4 reduction. IT and library, 0.8 reduction, and facilities and operation, a 2.4 reduction, for a total of 56.4 reduction in this budget. Again, it includes staff adjustments due to enrollment changes is included here, which we did right in the beginning. Mandated services and program additions and reductions to meet this budget allocation. As I go into this slide, I want to remind everybody, this is just a very quick overview, and as I said, you will get in-depth information during the presentations coming up in the next 2 weeks. So some of the major changes at the elementary education level: staffing levels adjusted to match our enrollment. We continue to hear about our enrollment decreases, and again, I want to say it's not just in the Newton Public Schools. We are experiencing this not only throughout the Commonwealth, really throughout the country. So people are experiencing, with our students coming through the schools, a decrease in our student population. Maximum class sizes will be increased in grades 3 to 5 to up to 28 students. We tried to protect our youngest learners because we know giving them an opportunity to come into school, to have the personalized attention that they need with our teachers was important. Reduced music elective options for students in grades 4 and 5. Elimination of assistant principal positions in 2 of our schools. And elimination of funding for Strong Start and Understanding Our Differences programming. I will tell you, I had the opportunity, I want to say a week ago, with Mayor Fuller to meet with the founders of Understanding Our Differences. We had a long conversation. We talked about the opportunity to come together and to take a look at a program that I think has been in the district 45 years. We will look to collaborate and to work and to make sure that our students throughout our district understand how important it is to accept and to be inclusive of all our school communities, and we will work to do that, and we'll involve the community in that process. What is the impact? The impact is 12 classrooms in grades 3 through 5 are projected to have 25 to 28 students. That might sound like good news when we talk about the numbers of classes, and I know Aisha would come to me and be pleased when we could look at class sizes that were more reasonable. But I will tell you the number of phone calls I got when one classroom in the district, by a decision made last year to reduce 2 fourth grades that I think had 13 students in each of them, Becca. And I remember talking to that teacher that told me it was the best year because she was able to, coming out of the pandemic, to support those students with more personalized learning than she ever could have imagined. And the reason that I say that is when you made the decision, and I understood why. You had a budget last year that was difficult. You took a chance and made the decision to roll that over to one grade 5 classroom. I think we ended up having somebody move in. It was important that we kept them at that school. That was a decision we made, but brought that classroom to 27. I will tell you right away, I had parent emails. I spoke to the principal, and I really have to thank the young teacher that was there when I walked in that room. She was doing an excellent job. But when I looked at 27 chairs in a small classroom and could go next door to a classroom with 20, 22 students, you could tell the difference that it made in what you were able to do. So I want to bring that up because that is impactful. String lessons and orchestra ensemble instruction will not be available to elementary students. The anticipated impact on middle school and high school going forward. Reduced leadership support at the elementary level, the impact of the assistant principals, and no summer programming for incoming K students, elimination of the disability awareness programming in grades 2 through 5 through understanding our differences. In secondary education, I'm sorry? Okay, I'm sorry. Let me see. I guess I have to. I'm sorry. Yes, the reduction of kindergarten aide positions. So again, this was a decision in looking at our kindergarten-sized classrooms of probably around 18 students. I can remember, and I talk about my visit to Lincoln Elliott and actually spent quite a bit of time in a kindergarten classroom there. And being so pleased to look at the support. Not only did you have a teacher, 18 students, you had a teacher aide in that classroom. You had additional supports in that room, and you understood the impact for those students. So at this point, we are looking at a reduction of about 17 positions. I know it is something that is in our contract, and it is something that we are in discussions with our Newton Teachers Association. I want all of our, as I talk about these reductions, whether it is a teaching position, whether it is an assistant principal, whether it is a teacher aide, please understand the value that we place on every one of you and the impact that you have on our students in the district. Did I miss anything else there? Okay. Secondary education. I think I better read on the from here. Let me see. Middle and high school staffing adjusted to match enrollment. Additional staffing reductions made at middle and high school. Maximum team sizes at middle school increased to 100 students, and the percentage of high school classes over 25 students has increased. And I want to say here that when you hear me talk demographically about our student enrollment, it is starting to hit the middle school. You will see more reductions at the middle school because of that. Interesting enough, at our 2 high schools, you are actually seeing an increase. I think you're seeing an increase of over 40 at Newton North and 35 or so at Newton South. So that was something we had to look at right away before we made any adjustments, and we did at the high school level also. but we did have to increase to make sure that we were supporting. I think you have a larger than not 8th grade class moving up to your current 9th grade classroom. So the restoration of 1.0 full-time equivalent middle school literacy specialist, and again, Toby and I have lengthy discussions about this, and we agree that when we look at some of the reductions that we have to make, it is important that those students that have learning gaps or need additional support or interventionists or coaches, that we are paying attention to those very needs. And the 10% reduction of extracurricular activities, clubs, drama, and music. So again, when you even heard me just talk about the strings with the instrumental offerings, that is part of that 10% at an elementary level. We also have made these same reductions, but again, students will still have opportunities. It is just a reduction to deal with the deficit before us. So what is the impact here? Larger class sizes in all grades and subject areas, reduced availability of first choice high school elective offerings and additional core courses. Courses with smaller enrollments may not be offered, and a decrease of extracurricular options and opportunities. Teaching and learning. I talked about the restoration of the curriculum coordinator staffing to ensure ongoing support for curriculum development and teacher support. Reducing subscriptions, instructional software, and curriculum materials. And many of you hear me talk about when I came here, I was so excited to be in a premier district, and I would look at some of your offerings, and you will hear from Dr. McCall some of the reductions that she has made, but I would look at some of your resources and could only dream of them in the district I was in, and you had them here. And these are some of the impacts, serious impacts on teaching materials that impact our students and our teaching staff to be able to provide top-notch materials. Shifting our ELL staffing model to match the needs of growing newcomer language learner population. You will hear us talk in the future about looking at teaching positions and increasing those, and in decreasing the teacher aide positions, which we presently had been using to deliver those services. The impact is increased support for curriculum implementation, teacher professional learning to promote high-quality instruction, fewer instructional resources for meeting a wide variety of needs, and more licensed ELL teachers and fewer ELL aides to support higher need English language learners. Student services. We're reducing special education teachers and aides. That is within, again, legal guidelines. It is going to impact caseloads. What is the impact? Increasing caseloads. Special education teachers, guidance, and school counselors will all see increased caseloads. Fewer opportunities, professional development for staff, and those are groups that we contract with. And continued commitment to inclusive in-district programming and opportunities. That's a positive impact. So that is looking at adding our programs to keep our students, when we can, in district being taught alongside their peers. Technology and library services. Major changes. Elementary library teacher adjustment due to enrollment. Reduce high school library teachers. Increase budget for one-to-one program. Adjustments to software licensing, including data analytics. What is the impact? It's a decreased student and class access to library resources and research skill development. Continued use of classroom technology to enhance teaching and learning, and support for the use of data to analyze our student learning. Facilities, major changes. A reduction in custodians. Reduce charter maintenance restore charter maintenance back into the NPS budget, and increase utilities budget for higher rates and usage. What is the impact? Less frequent rotation of cleaning duties. I believe it is a shift at our high school, so it will be on a rotating basis, some of the things that may be able to have been done nightly, and again, we will pay attention to the needs as they develop. Continue to provide flexibility to respond to our building-based needs. And administrative. Reduction in administrative support for business, finance, and planning. Addition of a financial analyst for our business, finance, and planning office. Tools to operationalize the district vision for increased communication and stakeholder engagement, as well as development of your new strategic plan, and increase all user fees. The impact is restructuring to allow for less administrative support in accounts payable, purchasing, and payroll, but fulfill a need for greater analytical support for our budget, our payrolls, our benefits, our grants, and our state reporting. Support for data-driven approach for clarifying the NPS vision for student achievement and success beyond graduation, and a higher fee impact on families may impact participation. And as I said, we will do everything possible to offer generous financial aid assistance for those students in need. And I do want to make a comment there because I've been around and unfortunately have dealt with some challenging budgets. And one of the first things people will talk about is, okay, superintendent, what about your administrative staff? What about your, and I will caution you, because one of the things that I know for sure, and I've looked at the data, I'm sure you've looked at it also, you need to make sure, and you are not at the top in administrative support. You're actually closer to the bottom end in administrative support. Although I have been appreciative of all your leaders, all of the hard work that you do. So during your times of reduction, this is when all of us do the best work that we can possibly do. It means the superintendent and their staff have to be available, even beyond your availability now, to be able to support those principals, those leaders, those department heads, and most importantly, the teachers and the support staff in those classrooms. So as we go through this, let's make sure that with the moving our budget forward and being able to have a sustainable budget means that we have to come together at this difficult time in making some of these really difficult decisions. So the next slide are the proposed fees, totaling about $650,000. I'm not going to read them all. You will take a look and see your chorus and band orchestra. It's a current fee of $150, proposed is $200. It's a $50 increase. If you go across the board, bus transportation, a $50 increase. The thing that we've added there is an elementary fee for our elementary students, which you had not done in the past for those students that were not required to transport. You look like you wanted to say something else there, Liam. Again, across the board, I'm looking for something that really jumps out at me. There are increases of about $50 across the board to each and every one of those areas. Other than, I guess, with Newton South parking, Tammy, I don't understand this. Is it because you have less spaces than Newton North? So they're premium? So. Yes.
Yeah, you have to clarify that for me as well. I did ask that question.
Yeah, parking has been a challenge. And the last slide, as I finish up, is our FY24 budget meeting timeline. And those of you that are here, or those of you that are listening and watching, I think it's important that what you have heard today is an overview, just an overview. It is important that you watch the process. This is what, again, you have elected your school committee representatives to be able to talk about what is important. It is probably it is one of the most important things that is under your umbrella, to work through this with us. And I look forward to meeting and hearing from the very people that are stewards of what happens to our school district. So again, you will see following today's presentation, Monday evening at 6:30. It is our instructional areas of elementary and secondary. Thursday evening next week, April 6th, is our instructional areas of student services and teaching and learning. Monday, April 10th, is our IT and non-instructional areas, operations, administration. Wednesday, the 12th, we will have, as is required by law, a public hearing on the budget. Monday, the 24th, is a discussion on the budget and a possible straw vote by the school committee to see if we are in agreement or where we're standing at that point. And on Thursday, April 27th, we are hoping to have the final vote. I have been informed that the City Council has put aside 2 dates for us. So May 9th and 10th, we will go before the City Council. I have to end on a positive note, so let's look at the last slide. So this is why we're here. This is why we're here today. This is why we're working together. It is all about making sure that the students that come in September have the same opportunities. And again, right now, I can't stand here and not talk about some reductions, but we did it across the board so as to try to move into a budget that we can sustain and eventually build if the need is there to build. If the need is there to reduce next year for something, again, based on data, that we make decisions we're moving away from, those are the kind of decisions that you make. You make that in a successful company. It's been difficult for us to do that. So hopefully going forward, as difficult as that is, we all come together, we support whatever the budget is, meaning that what we have before us is an opportunity to go that extra mile, to be in those classrooms, to making sure that our teachers have what they need, that our principals have what they need, that our administrators have what they need, that your superintendent has what they need, and school committee, mayor. You know, that is going to be, I think, a difficult task going forward, but I certainly know that you're up for it. So thank you. I'm actually told, thankfully, that right now there are no real questions. So I know there are questions coming, but I thank you for coming. I thank all those who will watch the budget process, and I look forward to the months ahead. Thank you.